The Galactic Federation's training station was a massive complex that orbited a distant star, serving as the primary location where recruits from across the galaxy were tested to become the Federation's elite soldiers. Here, species of every size, shape, and intelligence gathered to prove their worth in the most grueling and unforgiving environment imaginable. Among these soldiers was Sergeant Korgath, a Vexulian, a species known for their immense physical strength and superior tactical mind. Korgath stood at over 8 feet tall, with thick, armor-like skin, sharp fangs, and piercing yellow eyes that made most beings uneasy. He was a respected figure in the Federation, a seasoned warrior with countless victories under his belt, and he had always looked down upon humans as primitive, weak, and insignificant in comparison to the more advanced civilizations of the galaxy. He had seen the rise of many powerful species, but humans were still young and untested. To him, Earth's inhabitants were nothing more than a curiosity, barely worth his time. Enter John Jax Calloway, a human cadet from Earth who had volunteered to join the Federation in a desperate attempt to prove that humanity could be more than just a backwater species. Jax was younger than most of the other recruits, still in his early 20s, and his body didn't have the bulk or the natural abilities that the others did. But what he lacked in size and strength, he made up for with his determination and sharp intellect. Jax had seen the Federation as the only chance to elevate Earth's status in the galaxy, and he was willing to work harder than anyone to make it happen. From the moment he set foot on the training grounds, it was clear that he was in for an uphill battle. He was surrounded by beings that were far stronger, faster, and more experienced than he could ever dream of being. And of course, the first person to notice him was Sergeant Korgath. Korgath saw Jax and immediately knew he would be an easy target. The human was weak. He lacked the intimidating size and the raw power of most other soldiers. To Korgath, this human was nothing more than an annoyance, someone who would never belong on a battlefield. During the first days of training, Korgath made it his personal mission to belittle Jax at every opportunity. Whether it was in the combat simulation rooms, the marksmanship exercises, or the brutal endurance challenges, Korgath would find a way to humiliate Jax. If the human failed to complete an obstacle course in time, Korgath would sneer and bark insults at him. If Jax missed a target during a shooting exercise, Korgath would scoff and shake his head in disbelief. And every time Jax failed, the other cadets, most of whom were from far more advanced species, would laugh and mock him. It didn't take long before Jax became the subject of ridicule among the entire training class. He could feel their eyes on him whenever he made a mistake, could hear the whispers when he faltered. Yet, despite the harsh words and the constant pressure, Jax never snapped. He never let Korgath or the other cadets see how much it hurt. Instead, Jax kept his focus on his goals. He knew that in order to succeed, he would have to observe his fellow trainees, to learn from their every movement, their every mistake. While Korgath and the others spent their time mocking him, Jax spent his time in silence, studying. He would spend hours in the simulation rooms, analyzing the tactics of the other cadets. He watched how they fought, how they reacted under pressure, and how they adapted to unexpected challenges. Most importantly, Jax learned that while brute strength and superior technology could win battles, the key to true success lay in the mind. Korgath's tactics, while impressive, were predictable. The Vexulian's strength was unmatched, but his arrogance was his greatest weakness. Jax understood this well, even if he had yet to find a way to use it against him. But deep down, he knew that his moment would come. There was no way Korgath and the rest of the Federation could continue underestimating humanity for much longer. As the days turned into weeks, Jax's skills improved. He was still smaller and less physically imposing than his peers, but his reflexes became sharper, his thinking quicker, and his endurance stronger. He didn't have the physical power of the Vexulians, nor the speed of the Andorians, but he had something they didn't. He had the mind of a strategist. He could calculate moves before they happened, predict the next attack, and anticipate the movements of his opponents. And so, while Korgath continued to mock him, Jax remained calm and collected. He never engaged in a battle of words, never allowed his temper to show. Instead, he focused on the work at hand, determined that one day, when the time came, he would show them all just what humanity was capable of. In the depths of the training facility, something else was happening. Korgath's impatience with Jax grew. He continued to taunt him, believing that the human would eventually crack under the pressure. But every insult only seemed to make Jax more resolute. Even when he made mistakes, when he stumbled or failed, he got back up and tried again. And the more he did so, the more Korgath found himself begrudgingly impressed by the human's resilience. He couldn't deny it any longer. Jax wasn't just some weak, naive recruit. He was a force to be reckoned with. Korgath's ridicule was starting to wane, replaced by a nagging sense of uncertainty. Could this human really be the threat that he had originally dismissed? But it wasn't until the next phase of the training, a full-scale simulation of an intergalactic war scenario, that Korgath would truly understand just how wrong he was. During the exercise, cadets were pitted against one another in teams, and Jax was assigned to a squad with Korgath. The simulation was intense, with high-tech weapons, tactical maneuvers, and a full array of combat scenarios. Korgath took charge, as was his nature, and expected the others to fall in line behind his experience. But Jax surprised him. Instead of blindly following orders, Jax began suggesting strategies, clever, calculated tactics that allowed his squad to outmaneuver and outsmart their enemies. Slowly, Korgath realized that Jax's brilliance and strategy was just as deadly as his own physical prowess. And for the first time, the Vexillian sergeant began to understand that this human, this seemingly insignificant creature from a forgotten planet, might just have what it took to become one of the Federation's finest warriors. The time had come for the final trial. After weeks of intense and unforgiving training, the Galactic Federation's cadets were now about to face their most daunting challenge: the trial of combat. This was not just a test of physical strength, nor a simple match. It was a life-or-death simulation designed to push each cadet to their absolute limits. The stakes were high, and the outcome would determine who would be deemed worthy of becoming an elite soldier in the Federation's ranks. Every cadet, no matter their species, would face an opponent chosen at random, and only one would emerge victorious. For most, this was just another day in the training process, but for Jax, this was his moment, his one chance to prove that humans were not to be underestimated. Sergeant Korgath stood at the front of the hall, his towering presence commanding attention. As one of the most respected and fearsome soldiers in the Federation, Korgath's participation in the trial was expected to be nothing short of a demonstration of overwhelming power. He was pitted against a Xantarian warrior, a formidable foe with immense strength and combat prowess. The Xantarians were known for their brutality in battle, and everyone in the hall expected Korgath to easily defeat his opponent, just as he had done countless times before. The cadets watched with anticipation as the two giants squared off, their weapons gleaming in the dim light of the combat arena. On the opposite side of the hall, Jax stood silently, waiting for the announcement of his own opponent. He had trained hard, endured mockery, and faced humiliation, but now he was ready. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but he had something the others didn't: the ability to think, to adapt, and to see opportunities where others only saw obstacles. His body might have been weaker than that of his peers, but his mind was sharper. His opponent, as it turned out, was an Andorian soldier, one of the fastest and most skilled combatants in the Federation. Known for their agility and lightning-fast reflexes, Andorians were a breed built for speed, able to strike faster than most could react. The other cadets watched in disbelief when they saw Jax's opponent. Andorians were a challenge for even the most experienced soldiers, and they assumed that this would be just another failure for the human cadet. The simulation began. The room buzzed with anticipation as the combatants took their positions. Jax's opponent, the Andorian, was a blur of motion from the very first second. The cadet moved like a living missile, closing the distance between them in the blink of an eye. Jax barely had time to react, but instead of panicking, he did the opposite. He remained perfectly still, observing. The Andorian's speed was impressive, but Jax was calm. He focused on the movements, the rhythm of the battle, the small shifts in his opponent's posture. He was watching closely, analyzing every moment. Then, in the midst of a rapid strike, the Andorian made a critical mistake, a tiny misstep, a brief hesitation in their movement that, to most, would go unnoticed. but not to Jax. As the Andorian lunged, Jax reacted swiftly, his body moving with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. He sidestepped, using the Andorian's momentum against them. With a smooth motion, he grabbed hold of the Andorian's arm and, in one fluid motion, twisted, throwing his opponent to the ground with a single, well-placed maneuver. The room fell silent. The sound of combat, the clashing of weapons, was replaced by a stunned silence that seemed to stretch on forever. No one, least of all Jax, expected this outcome. The Andorian, who had been known for their lightning-fast strikes and nearly flawless technique, lay on the floor, stunned and disoriented, unable to continue. Jax stood over them, breathing heavily but calm. His eyes locked onto the rest of the cadets, who were still frozen in shock. He had done it. He had won. The room was filled with an eerie quiet, and then, slowly, the cadets began to murmur. Some were still too stunned to speak, while others exchanged incredulous glances. They had all expected Jax to be crushed, just as they had seen him fail time and time again during training. But now, they were witnessing something entirely different. Jax wasn't just a human, he was a force to be reckoned with. The same cadets who had once mocked him now found themselves speechless in the face of his unexpected victory. Even Sergeant Korgath, who had been watching the match with mild disinterest, found himself caught off guard. He had been so sure that Jax would fail, that his human opponent would crumble under the pressure of facing one of the Federation's finest soldiers. But what he had just witnessed was something entirely unexpected. Korgath had seen the Andorian's combat skills firsthand. He had fought alongside them in previous missions, but what Jax had just done was nothing short of impressive. It wasn't brute force or overwhelming strength that had won Jax the fight. It was precision, timing, and the ability to read the opponent's every move. For the first time, Korgath couldn't hide his surprise. His gaze flickered from Jax to the fallen Andorian and then back to Jax. There was a moment of silence between them, and in that brief instant, Korgath realized something important. Jax wasn't just some weak human trying to fit in. He had proven, in a single move, that he belonged here. The rest of the cadets, once so quick to dismiss Jax as a joke, now found themselves questioning everything they had believed about him. They had witnessed a human, a species they had thought incapable of standing on equal ground with the galaxy's most advanced beings, take down an elite Andorian warrior with ease. The whispers began to grow louder as the cadets began to process what had just happened. The human had not only survived, he had outwitted them all. Jax didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. His victory spoke for itself. He had done what no one expected, what no one thought was possible. As he turned to leave the arena, he caught Sergeant Korgath's eye once more. The Vexulian's expression was unreadable, but for the first time, there was a flicker of something in his gaze: respect. Jax had proven himself. The human was no longer just a cadet. He was a warrior. In the days following Jax's unexpected victory in the combat trial, the atmosphere at the Galactic Federation training station changed dramatically. Where once there had been laughter and jeers at Jax's expense, there was now a tense silence. The cadets who had mocked him, who had called him weak and incapable, were now hesitant to meet his gaze. They had seen the human cadet outmaneuver the Andorian, a soldier they had all feared, and the result had shaken their confidence. No one, not even the most advanced species in the Federation, had expected a human to outthink and outlast an Andorian warrior, and yet Jax had done exactly that. While the other cadets exchanged nervous glances, avoiding Jax or offering him forced smiles, one figure stood apart from the rest: the towering Vexulian Sergeant Korgath. Korgath had never been one to admit defeat, and his pride had been wounded by Jax's performance. He believed that it had all been a fluke, a lucky move, a simple mistake on the part of the Andorian that had allowed the human to win. To Korgath, humans were still weak, primitive, and unfit to stand among the Federation's greatest warriors. He believed that no amount of skill or strategy could undo centuries of evolution and technological superiority. The Federation had been built on the backs of races far older and more advanced than humanity. The thought that Jax's victory had any real meaning gnawed at Korgath. He spent the next few days stewing in his frustration, refusing to acknowledge Jax's skill or intelligence, still convinced that the human had no place in the galaxy's great military. But even Korgath could not ignore what was coming. Late one evening, as the cadets prepared for another round of drills, an emergency transmission blared across the station. A deep, mechanical voice crackled through the speakers, cutting through the usual noise of the training halls. "Attention all units, this is Federation Command. A massive alien fleet has appeared near Earth. Unknown vessels, unknown species. The Federation is deploying its forces to engage the threat. All available units are to be readied for immediate departure. I repeat, all units to prepare for battle." The room fell silent. The message was one of urgency, one that sent a chill down the spines of even the most seasoned soldiers. Earth, the very planet Jax had joined the Federation to protect, was now in danger. An unknown fleet, its intentions unclear, was heading toward the cradle of humanity. The Federation had to act quickly, and the response would require the best soldiers at their disposal. Sergeant Korgath was immediately called to the command center, his strong and imposing figure marching swiftly to meet his orders. He had fought in many battles, led countless missions, and faced threats from across the galaxy. Now, he was tasked with leading the charge to defend Earth. Korgath's heart raced with anticipation. He had seen many strange ships and alien invaders over his years of service, but nothing like this. The sheer size and unknown nature of the fleet meant that this would be a battle like no other. But even as he prepared to board the Federation's flagship, the Valerie's Korgath's mind remained focused on one thing, Jax. Despite Korgath's belief that humans were unfit for true combat, a surprising decision came from Federation Command. Jax was to join the mission. The human had proven himself in the combat trials, and his quick thinking had impressed higher-ups. He had demonstrated that, although physically weaker than the other cadets, he possessed the sharp mind and adaptability necessary for survival in the galaxy's most dangerous conflicts. Jax was assigned to Korgath's unit, and he would fight alongside the Vexulian sergeant in defense of Earth. When Korgath received the order, his fury was immediate. He felt his chest tighten as he read the message. "This is a mistake," he muttered under his breath. "The human is not ready. He's still weak. This is a battle for the Federation's finest, not some human recruit." The words left a bitter taste in his mouth. But despite his objections, the order was clear. Jax was to be placed under his command, and Korgath would have no choice but to accept it. The day of departure arrived swiftly. Korgath stood at the foot of the Valorous, the Federation's flagship. The massive vessel was a symbol of the Federation's might, gleaming and powerful, designed to carry the most elite soldiers and the most advanced weaponry. As he boarded the ship, Korgath could feel the weight of the mission ahead. His team was ready, but the presence of Jax on board felt like an inconvenience. Korgath had little faith in the human's abilities and no interest in guiding him through this mission. Jax, on the other hand, was silent but determined. He had heard the whispers of doubt, seen the sideways glances from his fellow cadets, and knew that Korgath was still not convinced that he belonged. But he had no intention of proving anyone wrong for the sake of pride. His only goal was to protect Earth. He had volunteered for this mission because he had seen how important it was to humanity's place in the galaxy, and he would do everything in his power to ensure its survival. The Valorous took off, its engines roaring to life as it left the station and headed toward Earth. The journey was long, but the crew was prepared. Korgath stood in the war room, surrounded by his officers, making plans for the impending battle. Jax sat quietly in the back, listening and observing. The fleet was massive, and no one knew what kind of enemy they were facing. All that was known was that Earth was in danger, and the Federation would not let it fall. The tension in the air was thick, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside Korgath. He could feel the sting of his own pride. He had been tasked with leading this mission, but now he was stuck with a human cadet who he still believed was unworthy. He couldn't shake the feeling that his command was being undermined by the presence of someone so insignificant in his eyes. However, as the Valorous neared Earth's atmosphere, the gravity of the situation began to settle on everyone aboard. They would soon face an unknown enemy, and they had to be ready. The command center buzzed with activity as officers coordinated with Federation forces around the planet. The battle to defend Earth was about to begin, and Korgath realized that it didn't matter who was with him or what he thought of Jax. The fight was coming, and he would have to lead his team, human or not, into battle. As the ship prepared for combat, Korgath's gaze flickered toward Jax. There was something different in his eyes now, something Korgath couldn't quite place. Perhaps the human wasn't as weak as he had thought. Maybe, just maybe, the time had come for him to reconsider his prejudice. But there was no more time for questions. The enemy was approaching. Battle lines were being drawn. And Korgath knew that this fight would reveal more than just the capabilities of his soldiers. It would reveal the true strength of the Federation. As the Federation fleet entered Earth's orbit, the gravity of the situation became all too real. The sheer size and power of the alien fleet were staggering. Hundreds of ships, advanced beyond anything the Federation had ever encountered, hung like a dark cloud above the planet. Their technology was unlike anything the Federation had studied or prepared for. Earth's defenses, though formidable, were overwhelmed within moments. The alien ships tore through the atmosphere with deadly precision, launching strikes at Earth's major cities with terrifying efficiency. The Federation's forces were humanity's last hope, and now they had to make their stand. Sergeant Korgath's team was among the first to be deployed to the planet's surface. The mission was clear: engage the alien forces and protect Earth at all costs. As the Valorous descended through the atmosphere, Jax felt a strange pull in his chest. He had always seen Earth as just another planet, one that was new to the galactic stage, with little influence or importance in the grand scheme of the universe. But now, standing at the edge of battle, he couldn't ignore the bond he felt to this place. It was his home, the cradle of humanity. He had volunteered to fight for Earth, and now it was time to protect it. The chaos that greeted them as they touched down was unlike anything Jax had experienced in the simulations. The streets of New York, once a symbol of human progress, were now a battleground. Alien ships soared above, raining down fire on the city. The sound of explosions filled the air, and the ground shook beneath their feet as buildings crumbled under the relentless assault. Korgath's team moved swiftly, engaging the alien forces wherever they were spotted, but despite their advanced weapons and tactics, the enemy seemed almost unstoppable. The Federation forces, while strong, were no match for the sheer numbers and power of the aliens. Jax watched carefully, his mind racing. The alien forces, though technologically superior, fought with a certain reckless abandon, as if they believed they were invincible. Their ships moved with precision, but there was a pattern to their attacks, a rhythm that Jax began to notice. The aliens were coordinated, but there were gaps in their strategy, slight weaknesses that could be exploited. He shared his observations with Korgath, but the Vexulian sergeant only grunted in response, his focus on the battlefield ahead. Jax knew that they were in for a long and difficult fight, but he also knew that there was a way to turn the tide. As the team advanced through the shattered streets, they were met with overwhelming resistance. The Federation forces engaged the alien soldiers, but their firepower wasn't enough to stem the tide. The alien warlord, a massive creature of unknown origin, led the charge. The warlord was everything Korgath had warned them about: brutally strong, nearly impervious to the Federation's weaponry, and equipped with deadly technology. The alien's eyes glowed with a malice that seemed to reflect the destruction around them. With each strike, it tore through the Federation soldiers, leaving a path of devastation in its wake. Korgath's team was struggling to hold their ground. They fought valiantly, but the warlord seemed unbeatable. The sergeant barked orders, directing his soldiers to form a perimeter, but it was clear that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Jax felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. The battle was slipping out of control, and if they didn't do something soon, they would all be overwhelmed. The warlord was powerful, but it was also arrogant. It saw itself as untouchable, a force of nature that could not be defeated. That arrogance was its weakness, and Jax knew how to exploit it. Drawing on everything he had learned in training, Jax began to think like a strategist. He knew that brute force wouldn't win this battle, not against a foe like the warlord. It would take speed, agility, and the use of the environment. Jax moved quietly, his mind calculating the best course of action. He noticed the warlord's overconfidence, how it lumbered through the battlefield with little regard for its surroundings. The warlord's attention was focused on the Federation soldiers. its massive frame blocking any attempts at a frontal assault. It was then that Jax saw the opening. The warlord had positioned itself near a broken building, a structure partially collapsed from the alien bombardment. The warlord, too busy crushing Federation soldiers, had failed to notice the unstable beams above it. Jax knew that if he could get close enough, he could bring the structure down on the warlord, catching it off guard. Taking a deep breath, Jax sprinted across the battlefield, using the chaos of the fight as cover. He dodged blaster fire, using every bit of training he had to stay out of sight. His heart raced as he approached the collapsed building. The warlord was too focused on its rampage to see him. Jax quickly assessed the structure. There were weak points in the beams above the warlord. If he could get high enough, he could trigger the collapse. The risk was enormous, but it was their only shot. With a surge of energy, Jax climbed the rubble, reaching the highest point where the beams were precariously hanging. He knew that if he didn't act now, they would lose the warlord and the battle. Jax reached for the explosives he had strapped to his belt, a set designed to cause controlled demolitions. He planted them quickly, making sure they were set to detonate at just the right moment. As he moved to climb down, the warlord finally noticed him, its glowing eyes narrowing in rage. With a defiant shout, Jax triggered the explosives. The beams above the warlord groaned under the weight, and with a deafening crash, the structure above it collapsed. The warlord, caught completely off guard, was buried beneath the rubble. The Federation soldiers, who had been struggling to survive, saw the massive creature go down, its strength no match for the sudden and brutal assault from above. The warlord let out a roar of fury, but it was too late. The rubble had trapped it. Its once unstoppable might now reduce to a tangled mess of alien armor and crushed metal. The battlefield fell silent for a moment. The Federation soldiers stood in shock, unsure if the warlord was truly defeated. But Jax, breathing heavily, knew it was over. He had taken down the seemingly invincible foe. The aliens' confidence was shattered, and with their leader incapacitated, their forces began to retreat. The Federation had won a crucial victory. But as Jax looked around at the devastation, he knew the war was far from over. This was only one battle in a much larger conflict. But in this moment, Jax had proved to himself and to Korgath that humans could be a force to be reckoned with. Korgath, who had watched from a distance, finally allowed a rare flicker of respect to cross his face. Jax had done what no one else thought possible. The human had turned the tide of the battle, and in doing so, had earned his place as a warrior in the Federation. In the wake of the warlord's defeat, the battle's tide began to shift in favor of the Federation. With their leader taken down by Jax's swift and calculated move, the alien invaders faltered. Their once unstoppable assault slowed, and the Federation forces, bolstered by Jax's unexpected victory, surged forward. Alien ships began to retreat from Earth's atmosphere, their confidence shattered, their once imposing fleet now a scattered remnant of its former might. The Federation's elite forces, having witnessed Jax's success firsthand, fought with renewed vigor, pushing the invaders back with precision and determination. The streets of New York, once a war zone, began to clear as Federation forces systematically cleared the remaining alien resistance. Sergeant Korgath, his towering figure silhouetted against the burning skyline, stood still for a moment, processing what had just transpired. He had seen countless battles in his time, entire wars fought across galaxies, but never had he witnessed something like this. The human cadet, who had once seemed weak, out of place, and unworthy of the Federation's honor, had just turned the course of an intergalactic war with a single decisive strike. Korgath had underestimated Jax. He had mocked him, doubted him, even hated the idea of working alongside him. But now, as the alien forces withdrew, there was no denying it. Jax had proven himself to be one of the Federation's greatest assets. The immediate danger had passed, but the aftermath of the battle was a quiet, somber affair. Earth had been saved, but the damage was immense. New York lay in ruins, its iconic skyline reduced to rubble. Other cities around the globe had faced similar devastation. Yet humanity stood tall, unbroken, having fought off an alien force far superior in both numbers and technology. The Federation had been instrumental in defending the planet, But it was Jax's actions, his quick thinking and understanding of the battlefield, that had turned the tide. In recognition of Jax's exceptional bravery and intellect, he was brought before the highest-ranking officers of the Federation. The assembly hall was vast, a room filled with representatives of countless species, all gathered to honor the hero of the battle. Jax stood at the center, his uniform slightly singed and covered in dirt, yet he held his head high. The Federation's leaders spoke of the bravery of the soldiers, the excellence of their tactics, and the courage they had all shown. But when it came time for the final words, it was Jax who stood alone at the forefront of the ceremony. A hush fell over the room as the Federation's commanding officer, a towering presence who had witnessed countless victories and defeats, raised his hand. "Cadet John Calloway," the officer said, his voice carrying throughout the room, "you have proven yourself to be a warrior of unparalleled skill and ingenuity. Your actions today have not only saved Earth, but have ensured that humanity will be respected across the galaxy. You fought with honor, intelligence, and the heart of a true soldier. You are now, and always will be, an integral part of the Federation. For your bravery and your service, I am proud to present you with the Federation Medal of Honor." Jax stood still, his heart pounding in his chest as the officer presented him with the medal. It was a symbol of recognition, not just from the Federation, but from every species that had once considered humanity nothing more than a primitive, unremarkable race. Now, with this medal, humanity's place in the galaxy was secure. Earth had earned its respect, and with it, a seat among the stars. Asa applause echoed throughout the chamber. Jax caught sight of Sergeant Korgath standing at the back of the room. The Vexulian, who had once been so dismissive of Jax, stood now with his arms crossed, a rare look of acknowledgement on his face. When the ceremony concluded and the room began to disperse, Jax made his way over to Korgath. The sergeant turned to face him, his expression unreadable, yet something in his eyes had changed. There was no more mockery, no more scorn, just a quiet, reluctant respect. "You were right," Korgath said, his voice heavy with an emotion Jax couldn't quite place. "I underestimated you. The human race. I've spent my whole life believing that strength is only measured by size, by technology, by the weapons one carries. But today, you showed me something else. You showed me that true strength lies in the mind, in the ability to adapt, to think beyond the obvious. You may not have the power of a Vexulian or the speed of an Endorian, but you have something even more valuable. The will to fight for what you believe in. The heart to never give up." Jax smiled, the weight of Korgath's words settling in his chest. He had known from the beginning that humanity had something to offer the Federation. It just needed the chance to prove it. And now, standing in the midst of this new era, he felt the full weight of what that meant. "I'm just getting started," Jax replied, his voice filled with quiet confidence. From that moment on, humanity's reputation in the Federation was forever changed. No longer seen as a fledgling species, Earth was now respected, not just for its survival, but for its strength in combat. The Federation no longer saw humans as weak or out of place among the stars. They had witnessed firsthand the courage and resolve of the human race. Earth had earned its place among the galaxy's finest warriors, and with that came a new responsibility. The world, still recovering from the battle, now stood united in the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe. The Federation had extended its hand to humanity, and Earth had accepted it. The future, once uncertain, was now full of promise. Humanity was no longer just a speck in the cosmos. They had arrived. As Jax gazed out into the stars, he knew that this was just the beginning. There was much more to explore, many more challenges to face, but now, with his people standing beside him, humanity had a chance to thrive in a galaxy full of possibilities. The moment was theirs. And Jax, with his heart swelling with pride, was ready for whatever came next.